So we all know this guy, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. You know Jensen is eating really good right now. Valuation as a company is at 3.36 trillion USD. New stuff is on the horizon. Coming in CES of 2025, their next generation GPUs are supposed to be announced, at least what all the rumors and everything are leading toward. You can see some specs down here. The RTX 5090, the top end card, might just be way ahead of even what the 4090 was. The price will probably match it, and NVIDIA is gonna make so much money off of it.
People think we make GPUs, and we do, but GPUs don't look the way they used to.
Consumer side for gaming and everything for NVIDIA, that makes them a lot of money, but you know, business, AI, enterprise stuff makes them even more money.
This right here is, I don't know, $10 billion.
NVIDIA is making so much money that this strategy must be great. Or at least you would think. Until you see something like this. NVIDIA appears to be having a major problem with wealthy middle managers who are barely doing any work, and new starters aren't happy. People that work there, is there becoming a stagnation problem with the work because NVIDIA is so successful? How companies pay employees in some ways and some compensation is actually by giving them shares in the company. When you're paid in shares, you would normally want to make the company better and make more money. It's kind of like getting commissions or tips if you're like a waiter or waitress or something like that. If you make the place better, then you actually make more money. You have the same vested interest in it. All of a sudden, these shares are worth like 270 times more than they used to be. This is an unprecedented amount of growth for a company, and all of these employees, they don't really have a motivation to work. Because NVIDIA is being valued so highly, that could be a problem now. But how can this affect the future of NVIDIA? Is this going to destroy their talent? Go ahead and dig into that right after a word from our sponsor. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. Private Internet Access is the most transparent VPN provider, and they are kindly sponsoring this video. Using the internet without a VPN is like playing Fortnite without a shield. You are vulnerable to any attack. Usually when accessing the internet, your IP address is exposed, which leaves it open to anyone who wants to snoop on all of your browsing data. PIA is a leader with world-class encryption, as well as they've been pressed in court and third-party audited, proving that they never record or store your data. But it's so much more than just privacy. PlayStation Network, for example, is required to play certain games, but it is only available in 70 countries. If you don't make that list, Sony just says tough luck, you can't play the game that you bought. But a VPN like PIA easily bypasses its restriction. PIA is incredible with a vast list of 91 different countries to choose from. They also provide options in all 50 states, which is great for me when I don't get a local showing of like a Steelers game, for example, then I can switch to that state and just get access to the game. Private internet access is available on literally any device that you can think of. Go ahead and use my link, piavpn.com/vex. I can get you a deal of just a little over $2 per month. That is so cheap, plus 4 months for completely free. They also offer a 30-day money-back guarantee because they are just so confident that you're going to like it. So again, check out my link if you're interested. Thank you for PIA sponsoring the video. Let's jump back in. Almost 30,000 employees working at NVIDIA at this current moment. This was tracked in August of 2024, so this is pretty recent data. From 2005 to 2015, the employees increased by 7,000. However, in 2015 to 2024, the employees grew by 20,000. So this is exponential growth in terms of employee and hiring and everything like that. 2019, 2020 is when NVIDIA shares and everything really started to skyrocket through the moon. And maybe as they've been developing more AI and stuff, they need more people working here. Also, they've been getting more employees. So like if you were granted $100,000 in shares 5 years ago, that would be about 2,700 stocks now. It would equate to literally $3.5 million. So NVIDIA might have a labor problem, saying employees who worked at this company for the past 5 years are now multi-millionaires and are in semi-retirement. So because NVIDIA is so successful with the shares, these people have made so much money that they don't really need to work as much as they used to. And NVIDIA themselves, Jensen Huang has specifically spoke on this as well. NVIDIA has had to work on keeping long-term, semi-retired, multi-millionaire employees motivated. Why do you need to work anymore? Why do you need to keep striving for innovation if you've already made it? Like, you could argue that they could just hire more people, but hiring new people just You're bringing people into a position that they're not very comfortable with. They don't know the ins and outs of the companies. Why NVIDIA is having probably even deeper of a problem here is because even though they've made a ton of money, they don't really have a reason to leave either, because the culture at NVIDIA is quite good. From an MIT assessment of NVIDIA employees found that the company's cultural values aligned with what they experienced in the workplace. Compared to hundreds of other large companies, NVIDIA's culture was well above average. And this is really proved by this, because NVIDIA's turnover rate, so new employees coming into the company and old ones leaving, is only 2.7% compared to other chip companies that are at 17.7%. So the people that work at NVIDIA tend to stay there for a really long time. That's probably because NVIDIA is at the forefront of innovation and their work culture is apparently pretty good. Yeah, NVIDIA is in this tough spot where you have a bunch of people. They're so rich now that they don't need to push themselves. They don't need to push the technology. They don't need to make the company as better than it really is. I mean, it's cool. And NVIDIA is compensating these people very well. They deserve it because they have put in the work. How is this going to look for NVIDIA in the long term as this talent maybe gets less and less motivated, or does eventually leave and NVIDIA has to replace them with people that aren't as knowledgeable on what's going on? I will say though, this whole semi-retired thing isn't exactly always the case. Like this guy on Reddit here, he actually works at NVIDIA. He said the situation is not as dire as this article paints. In my extended team, 75-ish employees, there's plenty of 50-ish age plus people who must be rich beyond my imagination, are definitely fat fireable. I don't know what fat fireable exactly means. And they're still as motivated as ever. So even though they've made a lot of money, they're still very, very motivated. Exactly this. People are passionate about what they do. Plus you work at the best chip company in the world. I mean, that's debatable. You're on the forefront of AI. Honestly, I could see NVIDIA going to $2 trillion market cap if this AI trend continues, which, obviously they have by this point. This guy's an older comment. Technically speaking, if there is a good enough work culture and people want to keep innovating, then you won't have this problem. But I think there's a clear reason why people might not be working as hard at NVIDIA. And actually NVIDIA might have problems retaining the talent they've built up over the years because, hey, these people are millionaires now. They might just leave, retire, and just do something else with their lives. They literally don't have to work another day in their life if they don't want to. I wanted to also check how hard it is to get hired at NVIDIA. And it really doesn't seem like, as long as you're qualified, it doesn't seem like the most difficult thing to get, at least in my opinion. This guy here at least makes it seem simple. So if you want to read through this, it's like a 4-step interview process. And obviously if you can do it and all that, then you might get hired. And if they like how you behave and everything, then you might get hired. But I have also heard that NVIDIA is pretty rough on its employees.
Let me tell you what some of the people who you work with said about you. Demanding, perfectionist, not easy to work for. All that sound right?
Perfectly, yeah. It should be like that. If you want to do extraordinary things, it shouldn't be easy.
I'm a little bit back and forth with this. I don't know if it's exactly difficult to get hired at NVIDIA or not. Maybe they are trying to get talent in there quickly to replace people that might end up leaving, because obviously what's really interesting is if you're retiring people early, like the company has compensated its employees so well because of how successful the company's been, more people are probably going to want to work for NVIDIA because you might make a ton of money working there. It's an interesting situation to be in. But on the other side of things, it might not just be this employee problem for NVIDIA. How is the competition holding up right now? Like, how is AMD and Intel going to be competing with NVIDIA on AI? AMD is also making servers and all that kind of stuff, kind of like NVIDIA is doing, where they can kind of slot in things. This is their CDNA architecture, which I think is like computing DNA. And this is a similar thing to what NVIDIA would be doing with servers. I'm not exactly sure how this competes compared to NVIDIA, how the price really is. Like, we can try to, wow, this thing has 1,000 watt TDP. Ooh. So it does seem like AMD is making some nice generational uplifts with their AI chips. Maybe this will make some pretty decent competition to NVIDIA and maybe knock down NVIDIA's evaluation just at least a little bit. NVIDIA's employees, I think it's a scary situation that they're in at the moment. Is NVIDIA going to be able to hold on to their talent into the future? How is it going to look in a few years if NVIDIA can't innovate as much because their talent isn't as motivated, or they're actually literally retiring and just, living their best life because deserved, I guess, at that point. You basically won the lottery if you work in NVIDIA. That's not all I want to talk about today. This is also a general news video. And I want to talk about AMD's next generation of graphics cards. We don't have a ton of news on it right now. I have made a much deeper video up here if you do want to check that out. You guys probably know this connector, right? This 12-volt high power connector. I've also made a video on this like, hey, I hate this thing. I honestly don't really like this connector at all, but all of the RTX 40 series graphics cards are using it pretty much. Not all of them, but Gamers Nexus made a really nice recap video on the whole 12-volt high power dumpster fire thing. I mean, these connectors have been melting. There's been multiple different recalls for connectors. They had to revise it even after it launched on graphics cards. It's just a freaking mess, dude. It is terrible. But what's really interesting to see is that there is at least talks behind the scenes that AMD's next generation of graphics cards are at least considering using this 12-volt high power connector that has such a bad history to it. You know, AMD's current generation, their 7000 series, just uses the classic old 8-pin connectors, old, reliable. They handle way more power than they're even rated to, so there's really so much room for error that actually AMD and Intel are testing the new VGA generation, both an old and new power connectors. The reason for this is that the 8-pin PCIe Express power connector still behaves more reliably in the tests. There are hardly any problems with it during the load tests. In contrast, the 12-volt 2x6, which is what the 12-volt high power connector is now, while much improved over the 12-volt high power, is nearly as reliable as the old option at just under 300 watts. But why are they considering this kind of scuffed connector for their next generation? I honestly just think it's for the sake of simplicity. You know, you plug in one connector, one 12-volt high power, 12-volt 2x6 connector, and it's just simple for the end user. Sometimes you might, you know, with 8 pins, you might have to plug in 2 8-pin connectors in order to get the graphics card running. More complicated to install one than you maybe want it to be. Maybe they just want it to be one connector to plug in. What's interesting is a lot of the issues that have come up with the 12-volt high power connector have been on graphics cards that are very high power, like the RTX 4090.
It's currently at 258 degrees.
I think we see the smoke, Steve.
You see the smoke?
Pretty much that's the only card that has had issues with melting connectors and everything because it just draws so much power. And yes, the connector is technically able to deal with that, but it doesn't always work out that way. If there's just a little bit of error, you mess up just a little bit when you plug it in, and all of a sudden it's gonna start melting or something like that. The thing is, with these new cards from AMD and Intel, I don't think that these companies are making super high power cards. So as it kind of says in the leak here, it's that the cards are under 300 watts. The 12-volt high power connector, or the 12-volt 2x6 as it is known now, is technically speaking just fine of a connector. Like, it's gonna run fine because it has so much overhead. Technically it's rated to run up to 600 watts. Kind of like, why not use it as long as it's not more expensive to put this connector on the graphics cards, and it makes it simpler to install, at least for the end user. Hopefully we don't have to use adapters and stuff, but we probably will. Adapters are annoying and I don't like them. What is interesting too though, is there is at least one board partner from AMD that has already tried this. ASRock has made a RX 7900 XTX, and this graphics card is passively cooled. I don't know how they're cooling like a 300 watt graphics card or 350 watt graphics card with no fans on it. It's insane. I don't even know how it works. Even though it's from this current generation, this one does have the new power connector, the 12-volt 2x6 power connector. It's already on it, and this thing is out there. You can try it if you want. Seems like AIB board partners are already experimenting with this, and it could easily come to the next generation, whether you like it or not. Like, the only problem 8-pin connectors really run into is, you know, if you have to plug in like 2 or 3 of them or something because your card is so high power. That's really the only time it's an issue, and even 2 isn't really that bad. So I don't think the new connector is necessary here at all. In terms of CPU side, the Ryzen 9000 X3D parts, which apparently are supposed to be coming this month in October. We all know how the 7800 X3D is. I love the CPU. It is super fast. I have one. It just runs great. It's a very fast gaming CPU. The X3D parts from AMD's CPUs, they have extra cache on them, and that cache is specifically very, very good for gaming. These are usually the fastest gaming CPUs that are available, the X3D parts, and it's been anticipated, you know, 9000 X3D. AMD's new generation, when is that coming out? Is it going to be good? The leaked benchmarks, there isn't that much. So we can see it tested in Far Cry 6 here, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and Black Myth Wukong. In specific here, I don't think in Black Myth Wukong that it's even like CPU limited, so I don't think this is even a valid test. Now these ones might be valid, I'm not 100% sure. We see here in Far Cry 6 that it's only a 13% improvement. It's like, that's okay. But in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, if this is CPU limited, we're only going from 288 to 295, which is a 2% improvement. That just isn't that big of a deal. This shouldn't really surprise you because AMD's newest generation 9000 series CPU, Zen 5, hasn't been that impressive. If you replace the names on them, you could probably be fooled which CPU was which running in tests or even just using on a system day-to-day basis. So unless they made some specific improvements for X3D, then we're probably not going to be seeing any kind of major gains here. Now, I did want to talk about one thing, and I don't know if these tests are wrong or something like this because I was looking through them. And one of them just did not make sense whatsoever. AMD's 9950X3D. Now this is a 16-core part, and then the 16-core Ryzen 9000 X3D part is here. For some reason, these scores are very, very close. And if we look here too, these ones are also very, very close. Like, I guess it's a good thing. Here's the 9700X versus the 9000 X3D. This is the 8-core, probably the 9800 X3D. You can see that these are basically within margin of error. The thing about the X3D parts is because it has extra cache on them, they typically can't clock as high because their temperatures, you know, it's harder to cool them with the cache. The cache kind of sits on top of the chip and that makes like a thermal barrier. So in a test like Cinebench, that's just an all-core workload and it's blasting power. Typically the non-X3D parts, so just the base model parts like the 9700X here, these ones are typically faster in these tests, and then the X3D parts are typically faster in games where the cache is like better leveraged. So I do find it odd here that with the X3D parts are basically within margin of error of the other ones. So this might mean that the X3D parts pretty much have no compromise if you get them, because typically you'd be trading some productivity performance to get gaming performance. Usually the gaming performance is well worth it and the productivity performance isn't as like worse of a hit as you would think it would be. But usually that is the trade-off. And then usually the X3D parts as well, because there's extra cache on them, do cost a little bit more. Because the architecture is efficient, maybe the temperature doesn't get out of control and they can push the clock speeds as much as they would on the other parts. Now I would think that this would mean that the other parts, you know, could probably be clocked harder then because it's efficient and everything, but it could be interesting that the X3D parts might not have a compromise, and we'll see how that goes. They should be coming soon. From leaks and rumors, we've heard that it should be October here, so at least by the end of the month, 9000 X3D, at least the 9800 X3D, if that's what it's called, the 8-core part, should be coming by the end of the month. Next thing I want to talk about here is the GDDR7 memory. So as we kind of mentioned earlier, with the new graphics cards from NVIDIA, for example, these guys are using GDDR7 memory, and currently, you know, it's on GDDR6 memory. In this case here specifically, it's a GDDR6X. In order to get 12 gigabytes of VRAM here and be on a 192-bit bus, each of the memory chips that are on this card are each 2 gigabytes. There's 6 chips and they're all 2 gigabytes to get that VRAM total. This card, you know, if it was made on this next generation of graphics cards, it could be an 18 gigabyte graphics card if it was on GDDR7. And that is because Samsung is rolling out this here that can each have 3 gigabytes on each chip, which means, you know, for the same amount of space and the same bus width, that they could have higher capacity graphics cards. Pretty cool. And this will probably be a cool thing for the more budget range of GPUs at the end of the day. It could be used on higher end GPUs to just get absurd amounts of VRAM. At the moment, GDDR7 3 gigabytes means, oh, if we have a 12 gigabyte graphics card, it could be an 18 gigabyte one. What sucks is like, you know, like the 4060 is an 8 gigabyte graphics card. It has 4 2 gigabyte chips. So that means if there are 3 gigabytes instead, it could be a 12 gigabyte graphics card. Unfortunately, the memory bandwidth wouldn't be changing that much because it's on the same bus width. Hopefully it wouldn't cost significantly more, I'm not sure. And even though this would probably work best on the budget end of graphics cards, because the new chips, the RAM chips could cost so much more, I don't know if we'll end up getting them at an affordable price point. I'm not really sure. Maybe this will end up being reserved for the higher end ones. We have seen rumors actually about the RTX 5080, that there might be a second variation of this card that doesn't have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but actually has 24 gigabytes of VRAM. Later on, it could be a 5080 Ti or something. That's because it uses 3 gigabyte chips for the memory instead of 2 gigabyte ones. We'll see how this goes. I would like more VRAM on our graphics cards. That would be awesome. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is FSR 3.1 being in Call of Duty Black Ops 6. This might sound like a pretty underwhelming bit of news, but AMD's FSR 3.1, I've made an in-depth video on this as well, and on that corner of the screen. This is AMD's latest upscaling and frame generation technology to put in games. The upscaling part makes a lot of sense for a shooter and everything to be competitive. It's like, oh, if you use upscaling, then your latency is going to get lower and your frame rates are going to be higher, so the game will be smoother, you can see more stuff. That's all good. But the frame generation component of this is probably the weirdest part to me, because frame generation, I don't think we've seen this in a competitive game up to this point in time. I might be wrong on that. I think maybe the finals has frame generation in it. I'm not 100% sure, but frame generation is an odd place in competitive games because frame generation doesn't actually just magically give you more performance. I mean, upscaling in ways can give you more performance just magically, because sometimes it doesn't look anything worse than what it would be at native. But frame generation, yes, it makes your frame number go up, but it also increases your latency significantly. And that means when you're trying to play the game, it's a competitive game and you're going to be playing with worse input latency than other people in the game, which to me just makes absolutely zero sense why you'd ever want to run this in a competitive multiplayer shooter or something like that. Maybe in the campaign you want to run frame generation, but I don't really get it here for most things that you'd be playing in Call of Duty. Let me know if you do know a good reason for it. Maybe you could use it for super slow motion if you're doing like replay footage or something like that, but that's about all I can think of why you'd want frame generation in Call of Duty. But yeah, that's been about it for me for this whole GPU news video. So the big thing is NVIDIA with their employees. I just think it's really interesting that NVIDIA is suffering from success where people don't need to work any harder. So it's an interesting time to be in, and I'm wondering how NVIDIA's situation is going to work out into the future. Also, AMD, I know they are working on stuff on the data center, so we'll see competition. Maybe it'll bring NVIDIA back down to earth at some point if AMD does start competing pretty well. AMD's 12-volt high-powered thing on their GPUs is interesting. I don't think it's personally necessary, especially considering that they don't really need 12-volt high power, considering how much power their graphics cards are probably going to be using. Also, the 9800X3D, AMD's new CPUs, the X3D parts are very hyped all the time. That one doesn't seem to be all that good. Best upside is that probably you won't have to make a compromise on what CPU you get. Samsung is introducing those GDDR7 chips with 3 gigabytes of RAM, so maybe on our graphics cards we're going to get more VRAM into the future, but I don't think that VRAM is out at a point where that these new cards are being designed for it or not. It'd also be probably limited availability at the time of launch, would be January of 2025. AMD seems like they're still in GDDR6, so I don't think that's going to happen for AMD's side of things. That's been it for me though. Let me know what you think on everything, and hopefully you have a good day. I'm gonna see you in the next video, and peace.